Good morning. My name is David. I go by Gant online, and yes, it is based off of this clothing company. Today, I'd like to review my experience with the Hidden Serpent. I just finished running this for my group of players over the weekend, and I'll get right into it. It is by Jeff Bighara Sparks. Dungeon crawl for 4 to 6 characters of level 2 to 4. Our party was around level 3 and 4 magic user, elf, and a dwarf with a smattering of retainers. I introduced this adventure to them as a quest from a dragon that they had wronged, and the dragon requested that they repay him by returning the part of his treasure hoard that they had stolen, as well as clearing out this keep for his new lair. The dragon knew about the lair because he had been captured by the party and then stolen from the party by a group of bandits and then freed himself from those bandits, whom he interrogated and found out that they were part of this keep. So the party did not have much to go on other than a location. So I provided them the handout here and the general idea on the hex map where it would be located. They had a tough time finding it, honestly. There is a automatic set encounter with a returning captain from the stronghold, the hidden bandit stronghold here. And they didn't really go into that with a very detective mindset. They kind of just encountered them and then believed everything they said and went on their own way, which is no fault in them. Eventually, the party arrives at the stronghold, and there's like this bramble patch that is an illusion that they're supposed to just find because the handout says look for brambles. So I describe this hill with brambles multiple times, and they never really get it. So they send up one of their retainers, a thief retainer, to just kind of do an inspection around the hill. And I rule that she touches the brambles as part of her inspection, and that makes the illusion disappear in order to kind of get things moving. So it starts with the party entering this tunnel here, and there is a door with a guard behind it and a looking latch. They're very quietly entering the hallway. The dwarf does manage to they look for traps and they detect the deadfall trap on the other side of the door. So their plan is, and it takes quite a long time for them to deliberate, their plan is to have the thief retainer knock on the door and pretend that she is interested in being recruited into the mercenary company, which doesn't go in their favor because when she does that, the orc guard slides a latch open, and as per the module instructions, he immediately asks for a password. And so she says, "Hi, I would like to join your party," and he just goes, "Password." And the player controlling the retainer just kind of freezes, and they have no idea what to do. And I think he says something else, which is not the password. And then the orc guard puts his crossbow up to the view latch and fires, and just narrowly misses the retainer. She's able to duck out of the way in time, at which point the rest of the party, who is standing back in a illusion caused by phantasmal force, they're all hidden. They loose a volley of shots at the eyelet, which actually does hit I think that one of them gets a nat 20, which so they manage to kill the orc through the hole with the auto hit. And then they have the problem of the door being closed. So they do pick the lock here. They walk in, and there's actually a random encounter with a single orc. So I rule that an orc is coming to trade shifts for watch for the guy that watches the front door. So he opens these doors, these double doors up here, sees that his comrade is dead, and then immediately shuts these doors, bars them from the other side, and begins to alert the entire complex. At which point these two archers that are hidden behind these secret doors open the doors and fire, one of them almost killing the party's magic user player, and a retainer takes the other hit. So before I go any further, I mean, a frontal attack on this complex is definitely one way to play it, but it's not necessarily the intended way, of course, because this is an OSR adventure location, so there is no right way to do it, but there are options for sneaking in and taking advantage of the chaos that the complex of bandits and whatever is already, suffering from. But my party didn't do that. They they were on a tight deadline to clear this out before the dragon came and murdered them for failing their quest. So once the alarm went up, they kind of just hunkered down and decided to just go with it and attempt to clear out the entire keep. So there was 30 some bandits and a leader on this first level versus I think there were 9 of them, including their retainers. They did, however, have a wand of fireball that they luckily had looted from a previous adventure that helped them greatly. The guards are like on their way. Immediately once they realize that this door is locked, the elf has a knock spell memorized, and they blow the door open, file out here. At this point, there are like 10 brigands kind of in this hallway rushing to arms, and the magic user just unleashes a fireball here, kills 10 of them. They enter, have a shootout with these two archers, go around this corner where they can hear more noises coming from as the mercenaries that were sleeping in the barracks are gearing up in the armory, as well as the bandit leader Krask is coming out of his sparring session and kind of guiding them down the hall. They launch another fireball, of course, and destroy this like 6 or 7 more brigands. And at that point, I think they essentially have a couple fights to the death. I think they have 1 retainer die. Long story short, they, with the just pure brute force, clear out the entire mercenary faction. So at this point, this is kind of a flaw with this module, in my opinion. I mean, it's been really fun up to this point, but there are a lot of empty rooms here, and without monsters filling them, since they have killed all of the brigands, it took quite a while to map and explore the entire facility, and it was pretty boring. It was very administrative clerical work at that point. We actually had most of the players step away from the table. They were like preparing dinner, while me and the mapper spent a good probably hour mapping out the rest of the rooms here, except for the Ziglin's wizard area up here, conveniently saved till last because it is kind of the most interesting. Yeah, it took them quite a while to map this out, so that was a bit of a downside to just having that brute force encounter, because it took a lot of the tension away and it was just boring. And on top of that, a lot of these rooms are not that interesting because this is just a conventional stronghold. So it's not like there are crazy weird traps or weird things that they don't know what they are. I mean, I think Jeff definitely did as much as he could with that. Yeah, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. So they find a few secrets. They do manage to break into Ragnar's area, and they don't end up looting a ton of the like really valuable stuff from the fortress, such as the furniture and even the statue on the second level, which we'll get to later. They are on a time limit and they don't have time to get everything out of the keep before the dragon arrives. So they mostly just take the magic items, which includes like a mace +1, a elven cloak. There's some potions and things of that nature. They don't find Ragnar's stash, or Rogar, I think is his name actually. Rogar's stash that is in his little escape route. Although they do find the door to the escape route, they don't actually go into it where his go box is. So they don't find quite a few magic items that he has in there. So once we have this area mapped, they find the human slaves, they release them. Now this puzzle, and to enter the Zeglin's quarter, was quite difficult for me to run. It didn't help that it had been quite a while and I was fairly tired at this point, and a little bit high. This is difficult enough to wrap your mind around sober. So I kind of screwed it up a couple times, I think, and eventually just had to sort of hand wave it. But it did throw them for a loop, literally for a few minutes. And that was actually quite engaging, even though I botched it a little bit. So they eventually make it into the main octagonal room here. They discover the false floor illusion before falling victim to its trap and start making their way around the doors. They do fall for the false door trap where the floors tilt down, but since they often tie themselves together in areas that are hazardous like this, where they know that there's a ledge, because the majority of the party makes their save and they're able to grab onto a door handle or a door sill or something like that when they feel the floor start to tilt. None of them actually fall down into that second level where there's a pool. So they methodically go through these rooms, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, because Jeff has some pretty unforgiving traps here. And I mean, maybe they're not entirely unforgiving, but my group is comprised of entirely new players and then one person that has played D&D before but is coming from newer editions. The nature of these traps in particular really started to frustrate them, not necessarily in a unacceptable, frustrating way. It was kind of, I guess, entertaining and like a teaching portion. A lot of these areas have secrets that you can discover, but the secret is either pointless or it is a trap, because this magic user has essentially just built 50% of his lair to be red herrings that either do damage or just waste your time. So that was an interesting lesson for the group to learn, that not everything is just going to be conventional. And it was very entertaining watching the magic user get excited once he thought he finally found the secret, and then getting pissed off again when he realized that it was yet again another trap. One of the better examples of that is room number 16 has a footlocker in it that has a false bottom. The footlocker is locked and trapped, which they managed to get through unscathed. It's just a sleeping spell trap, but the footlocker has a false bottom in it, which they find, and then despite falling for 4 or 5 different secrets that were actually just traps before, they think that the false bottom of the footlocker is, finally the real hidden treasure. And there's a big leather-bound book in there with the first initial of the wizard's name engraved on it, and it looks like a big spell book. And so they get really excited. And they open it up, and the thief character gets incinerated. The thief retainer, just a retainer, gets absolutely destroyed by the magical fire rune trap that the book is enchanted with. And the magic user player still keeps the book in order to read languages on it later, at which point he realizes it is just crude orcish limericks and poetry, you know, and that was after they had already found the real wizard's chambers. So they didn't put together that there are, for some reason, 2 bed chambers, and that this one was the kind of the false one because this one just had an unlocked door. You know, just little details like that. I think like Jeff does a really good job of telegraphing a lot of this stuff, but unless the player is like already fairly experienced with the kind of antics that come along with old school play, they're probably going to fall victim to a lot of these traps. So it was a good learning experience for my players, and none of them died, partially because of, you know, I would always say like, okay, so is the player character opening this book, or are you getting your retainer to do it? Hint, hint, hint. Had to do that a couple times, but they eventually get the picture, and you know, I'll be less forgiving in the future. So after they deal with all this, they finally found what is kind of the main treasure here, which are these cauldrons that do weird things. And actually they don't really mess with any of them, which was a little bit disappointing. They dip a human flesh, like a cut off limb from one of the bandits, into each cauldron just to make sure that they're not dangerous or corrosive, which a few of them are. Discover the water elemental cauldron. They run away from, or actually no, I rolled a neutral reaction for the water elemental, so I decided that it wouldn't attack them if they didn't attack, and then it just goes back into its cauldron after a little bit. So they decide that this powerful water elemental could be useful in possibly double crossing the dragon that they're doing this quest for. They want to finish clearing out the dungeon. They have a couple more days before the dragon comes to collect his money and his keep. And just to clarify again, that's not actually part of this adventure. That's just something that I spilled over from our campaign and was kind of an arbitrary reason for them to come to this stronghold. So they do go down to the second level finally, and at the second level it was a nice change of pace because finally I can reintroduce wandering monsters, and there was a good little story down here, kind of inherent story about how the dwarves that had built the keep had dug, you know, they had started on the second level, they had found some magical gem and magical statue, at which point the magic user, I guess big boss of this area, who is not actually in this module, but he wanted all of the gems that they found for himself, so he killed them all. So this area is inhabited by dwarf zombies, a dwarf wight, and a dwarf wraith, which was actually, that was a really fun encounter. So they explore it pretty methodically. They encounter the Lasher in the pit here, which is a new monster based off of the Roper. The wizard has like a dagger of throwing that they managed to cut off the Lasher's tentacles and then eventually just kill it. And they even go so far as to look inside the Lasher's gullet, where they do find some treasure that's in there, 1,000 gold diamonds. So that was very clever play of them. The dwarf repels to the bottom of the chasm and like collect all of the fallen magic items from the Lasher's victims that are down there. That was really good. All of these rooms are kind of nothing. They're just monster encounters. So there are a lot of monster encounters down here. So we had a lot of combat. There's sturges, there's a spider, there's a rust monster, there's shriekers, not to mention all of the dwarf undead. They never find this secret room here. It's actually Zeglin's hidden chamber with his backup spellbook and a couple other magic items. So they never really do find the wizard's magic stash. So they clear all this out. They come back in this room, actually number 9. This is the room that connects with the octagonal trapped room in the wizard's lair. So it takes them a while to figure that out, but they kind of grappling hook up the chimney and do figure out that like the dwarf sticks his head through the darkness veneer and realizes that is that room. And that's kind of a big aha moment for them, which was pretty fun. And then they go back down here. They throw a barrel of oil from area 1 into here, light it on fire, and the shriekers just go absolutely insane, attracting a rust monster whom they lure into the pit here. The Rust Monster doesn't take any items except for the dwarf's shield. They kind of shield bump it into the chasm, and the dwarf's shield disintegrates because it's not magical. And they move into these rooms here. I let them take the gem out of the wall here, and I didn't immediately have it lose its powers. So there's a gem in the crystal cavern here that has like an effect table on it. And every time you touch it, one of those effect happens. They kept rolling 4, 5s, and 6s, which restores lost experience levels, and none of them had encountered the Wraith yet, so it wasn't applicable. So they keep removing, they like dig it out of the wall, remove it, at which point it loses its power, and then they keep putting it back in and pulling it back out. I probably should have just ruled that the powers wouldn't come back when they put it back in, and eventually I did, but they do that a few times. They think that it's somehow connected to the statue room here, because Jeff describes a similar quartz-like gem being streaked through the walls here. That takes a while. They're absolutely convinced that this statue here in Area 5, which is just treasure, really, they think that it has some other effect or that there are secret doors somewhere, which is not the case. So they never really do anything with that. They do eventually haul this statue up to the second level with, they have a rope of unburdening from the Black Worm of Brandonsword, which allows them to pull heavy items along the ground as if they were weightless. So they like put it on a sled and drag it up the stairs up to the second level. They finally discover that there's an exit here. Then they do have an encounter with the Dwarf Wraith, which was their first encounter with something that could drain experience and I experience levels, and I do play that by the book. So luckily the Dwarf Wraith doesn't hit once before they're able to do a bunch of damage with their silver weapons. They all have either silver weapons or magic items at this point because they're pretty thoroughly mid-level, so the Dwarf Wraith is not really a problem to them. But after the encounter ends, I explain the concept of why undead monsters like wraiths and wights are so scary in old school D&D, because they can drain entire levels of experience. So I like that there's that connection, that not only are they scary in the game because it's this incorporeal undead, disgusting creature, but it's also scary from a mechanics perspective because of just all of that work being lost. So at this point, it is time for their meeting with the dragon. I mean, that is basically the module ended as written. So I'll briefly describe what happens. They essentially have the choice of trucing with the dragon. They collect all of the valuable tapestries, furniture, the statue from the second level. They gather it all into a single room. The dragon is very prideful, so they lead him into the room here, and they say, "We've cleared the keep as you requested. We don't have the 10,000 gold because they didn't have time to go back to the town that has the bank with all their money at it and back in time. So they say, we don't have the 10,000 gold that we owe you, but here is more than that value in treasure, like tapestries, statues, furniture. I rule that the dragon is happy with this, with the turn of events and that arrangement, and the players decide not to double cross him since they have essentially completed their duty, and the only thing that they would gain from killing the dragon is access to this keep itself, which wouldn't even necessarily be permanent or scot-free, because there are a lot of people that know of the location here, including the escaped slaves, some escaped mercenaries, not to mention the actual builders of the keep, Zeglin and Rogar, who are powerful magic user and fighter that I mentioned these layers belong to. So who are presumably out in the world somewhere adventuring and probably on their way back. So they do truce with the dragon and leave on their way. The players actually did request that we play out the dragon fight just to see what would have happened, because they had this clever idea of putting the water elemental cauldron in this kitchen here, and then essentially leaving the room that the dragon is in, with the treasure in it, and then casting Hold Portal on this door and spiking the other 2 doors, and then knocking over the water elemental cauldron, causing them to fight. So just to indulge them, we played that out. The dragon can't hurt the water elemental because he does not have magic attacks. So the dragon tries to escape, at which point the water elemental returns to its cauldron once the dragon leaves the room. That's the rules as written. And then the dragon engages the party who has spread themselves out in this hallway here and kills all but 2 of them, even with Wand of Fireball being used a couple of times. So that was fun, and they really didn't regret not, or they were glad that they didn't engage the dragon, and that was it. So yeah, overall, this adventure is fine. I wouldn't say it was my favorite that I've ever ran, but for something a little bit different than your average forgotten location exploration, it was pretty good. There is a lot of depth to it, despite some of the rooms not being as detailed as I would like. The read out loud text is fine. It's a little weak in some spots, and also he wrote it in italics for some reason, which is a little bit annoying to read. And I mentioned that in another one of my videos. But overall, this is a good adventure, and I would recommend it. It's worth having a spot in your campaign world if you think that it fits the vibe and you like kind of those more old school, almost AD&D, like very simulationist focused type adventures. That is it for this time. Have a good day.